let's talk about Mercury. Mercury is the 80th element on the periodic table, and along with bromine is one of only 2 elements that are liquid at room temperature, and is the only metallic element that is liquid at room temperature. It's known for being incredibly toxic, and also, despite being incredibly toxic, used in a lot of places and contexts. One of the most common forms of mercury is in cinnabar, and I've talked about cinnabar before, so I'm not going to mention it very much here. If you want to learn about cinnabar, go check out the video I did on that a while ago. This video is just about elemental mercury mostly, as well as mercury poisonings, historical context, and all of that. Pure elemental mercury is this very interesting silvery liquid. People for a long time have been fascinated by mercury with good reason. Like, if you didn't have a basic understanding of chemistry, you would be absolutely baffled by this, and even people who do understand chemistry find mercury, like, super fascinating, myself included. Historically, mercury would be used in anything from thermometers to dental fillings to vermilion red pigments that were made with cinnabar. It's also still currently used in most fluorescent lightings and is sold in some over-the-counter medications. It also just used to be sold, so you could just play with it, and fortunately, liquid mercury does not absorb very well through the skin, and if it is absorbed, it is passed quite easily through the body, so acute mercury poisoning is not that common. The dangers of mercury poisonings come from long-term exposure, and unfortunately for us, mercury is quite common in a lot of contexts. Again, it is very common in the environment. It can get accumulated in fish and shellfish. It's present in the air and water supply, so mercury at very low doses is pretty much unavoidable. But again, fortunately, acute mercury poisonings are not very common. The danger of acute mercury poisoning does not come from the liquid form in which mercury is the most well known, but instead in the vaporized form. Symptoms of acute mercury poisonings are very bad, very fast acting, and very hard to treat. It includes things like respiratory failure, multiple organ failure such as your liver and lungs and kidneys. It also causes very vast and extensive brain damage. It messes with the central nervous system, causing things like hallucinations and psychosis, and it can very quickly and very easily result in death due to multiple organ failure. Now, acute mercury poisoning comes rarely, but from things like messing around with broken light bulbs and thermometers that contain mercury, because when they're broken, it can vaporize into the air, and that's where the danger comes from inhaling mercury vapors. Another common cause is eating excessive amounts of mercury-contaminated seafood, such as shellfish. Now, this isn't me telling you don't eat seafood, and while I personally am not the biggest fan of seafood, most of the time, it will not hurt you. It's just excessive amounts of shellfish that have been contaminated with excessive amounts of mercury through pollution and mining and all of that. So make sure you know where your seafood is sourced from, and make sure you get it non-contaminated. Other less common sources, especially now since we've kind of migrated away from using mercury in dental fillings, sometimes when getting dental fillings taken out, it can release the mercury used in those fillings. However, that is much less common. That is pretty much only accidental, and it doesn't happen nearly as often now since we pretty much no longer ever use mercury in dental fillings. Now, chronic mercury exposure is the more common type of mercury poisonings. It happens over a long period of time and usually very gradually with limited symptoms showing themselves initially. Now, chronic symptoms of a mercury poisoning may not even begin to express themselves as mercury poisoning. It includes things like changes in your emotional state, such as an increase in anxiety and depression. Chronic exposure does still affect the central nervous system, so it does mess with things like your emotions as well as your motor control. It can cause tremors and numbness and kind of loss of motor skills. It also includes things like muscle weakness, eventually trouble walking and picking up things as well. It causes issues in teeth and gums with kind of like a grayish film in your mouth, which is kind of gross. And also eventually kidney and liver damage, which may present as difficulties or excessive urination. Now, in terms of treatment, at least for acute mercury poisoning, you need to basically do chelation therapy. That's where the drug dimercaprol is applied via injection to the mercury poisoning victim. The drug binds to the mercury and flushes it out of the system with the urine, hopefully before all of the mercury can be absorbed into the system and start causing problems. As for chronic exposure, you can try the chelation therapy. However, if it's over a long period of time, the mercury probably is already in your system, and that's not the most effective thing, as I understand it. Pretty much for chronic mercury exposure, you need to just remove yourself from the source of mercury, if at all possible, and then just kind of try to manage the symptoms. Now, mercury also does have a lot of interesting bits and pieces throughout history where it's involved. For example, this is one of the original illustrations of the Mad Hatter from Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland. Now, hatters was an actual profession where people would genuinely just make hats. However, many of the dyes used in hat making used mercury, so many people who made the dyes and dyed the hats and made the hats, they suffered from chronic and acute mercury poisoning. This may explain many of the traits seen by the Mad Hatter in Alice in Wonderland, because he was suffering from mercury poisoning, causing all of those, Mad Hatter, madness, all of that. Again, because mercury affects the central nervous system, it kind of messes with your brain, causes brain damage, messes with your nervous system and your emotions and all of that. So, all of the traits exhibited by the Mad Hatter could be attributed to the mercury poisoning. Mercury also pops up a lot in the historical and archaeological record, everywhere from ancient Egyptian tombs to the ancient Mayan ruins to old ancient Chinese rulers. People who in the ancient times did not know how stupidly toxic mercury was thought it was some sort of, ironically, health elixir that would help you retain lifelong beauty and live longer, which we sure know ain't true today. There's records of alchemical recipes for, again, trying to find an elixir of youth and health that used mixtures of sometimes mercury, lead, and arsenic, which, holy fuck. Now, mercury was also historically known as quicksilver because it looked like just silver that was liquid. There's ancient Greek myths about quicksilver being used by the inventor Daedalus in many of his inventions and all of that. Despite mercury in its elemental liquid form being quite rare to find and is almost always only seen in ores, again, such as cinnabar, it does pop up a whole lot and has led to many an interesting health idea and has caused many a poisoning and premature death throughout history. So while it is super cool and looks very fun to play with, make sure you don't, if you have the chance, touch liquid mercury, and unfortunately it is very common throughout a lot of the earth, so most of us have at some point been exposed to very small amounts of mercury. Yay!